We've done the full story arc, everyone. We started off with a load of people who study earth sciences and geosciences, etc. We've been into the wonderful world of arts and law and all kinds of areas, and now we're back in the world of geology. I bring to the stage the fantastic Shaun Barker, who is speaking to us from Vancouver. Is that correct, Shaun?
Yeah, hi Sarah, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Now, Shaun, when we were prepping for this, you were talking about the evolutions in AI and what that means for the world of mining, but also the world of teaching, and what's going on in those learned institutions around the world, which is great because our friends, as in our students from the University of Oxford, started their insights into certain areas of uncertainty in the world with AI. But Shaun, what does this mean to you?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sarah. So I guess like most of us, I've been watching the AI journey for probably, 10 or 11 years and engaging with various data scientists and AI things along the way. I'm a domain expert geologist, so it's been fascinating seeing the narrative of, how AI is going to transform mineral exploration, transform mining. And I think to some extent that is true. However, it's probably massively underdelivered to date. We've seen a huge amount of promise, arguably a huge amount of snake oil, a lot of money raised, and possibly not a huge amount of value delivered in many of those areas that have sort of attracted publicity. But yeah, it is fascinating to see, like many of us, sort of ChatGPT emerged, 22, 23, start playing with those tools as a domain expert and say, you put in a very simple query and get back stuff and go, that was just wrong. But keep following it, and those tools have just got better and better and better. What was interesting is watching some colleagues who, it hits the buzz, it hits the hype, they tried it out. Oh, yeah, that was useless. But then they haven't gone back and tried them again, which is really interesting to see people say these tools aren't actually any good. I'd never use them. So that's been a fascinating piece of it. And then just before Roundup, sort of an annual mineral exploration conference held in Vancouver this year, IMDEX always sort of holds a technology symposium, and at that, they had a speaker from Microsoft who highlighted that yes, we've gone through sort of the Chat GPT, individuals interacting with AI. But what's about to hit us is what they call the sort of agentic AI, where it's no longer you sort of asking AI a question. You give an autonomous AI bot or agent, for want of a better word, a task, and it goes off and does it for you. Sort of a fascinating change. And then the next stage from that is we'll have swarms of these bots that will interact with each other to do our jobs for us. So I dutifully decided that as someone who likes to sort of make sure I stay somewhat current, that I better play around with this. And a big thing have been the emerge of these, coding agents, which have hit the news a lot recently. Sort of, AI-driven computer coding. And as a geologist, too, fundamentally, I admit my coding skills are limited to writing equals 1 plus 2 in Excel. It's always been a struggle for me to stay on top of that. So when I started playing around with these tools, it was really amazing to see what a non-coding expert could all of a sudden deliver for themselves. So that was fun. It was interesting. And when I built some tools around, things that I wanted to do for a while around petrography and processing different types of chemical data from our labs, I started reflecting back on what I'd been able to do. But then I really reflected back on, why was I able to do it? And the reason why I was able to do a lot of what I wanted to do was not because I could code, because I can't, but I knew a small amount about how computers work, so it was useful. But I also knew a lot about the area that I was trying to build my tools around and my expertise in. And then I thought about, okay, what would I have done previously if I wanted to do this project? And why hadn't I done them previously? Why hadn't I got someone just to code the stuff for me? Well, I probably would have had to have either found an undergraduate computer scientist as sort of a co-op or maybe even a grad student who would have gone on maybe a 1 or 2 year journey. It would have cost a lot more money. It would have taken a lot more time. And what might have been a 2 year project for a student, all of a sudden I could do in a couple of weeks, literally in the evenings over a cup of tea or a beer by myself. So I thought about that and said, well, okay, that's great that I could do all of that stuff. The efficiency gain is tremendous. That's, the sort of the economic opportunity that we've been sold by the AI companies. But reflecting back on that, what that means is that what would have been a graduate student opportunity or a co-op opportunity is now gone. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to give someone a bunch of Excel data or give someone say, can you figure out anything interesting? I can give it to an AI bot and it's going to go off and give me a bunch of results, which as a domain expert, I can look at and go, that doesn't make sense. Can you look harder at it or go, oh, that's a really interesting insight. I want to dig further into it. So I think that's a fascinating change in how people's career paths, where a lot of people's first opportunities are, relatively low level. It might be in the geosciences, you go off core logging, or you get some very low level jobs. You get your first work experience and your first real world experience in that environment. And I think the challenge is that AI is going to start eating a lot of those low level jobs. That first rung or two on the ladder is going to be an AI role, which now means how are people going to get to become domain experts if AI is eating a lot of those training opportunities? So I think that's a really fascinating change in not only geoscience, but more broadly. Um, I also think that the education system is really struggling to cope with this. Having sat through a few university forums where it's almost somewhat sort of very binary. Some people are either these tools are fantastic. How are we going to harness them and use them in the education sector? How does our teaching now have to change? Versus a significant number of people who are, right, we're just going to take the tools away. They don't get to use them. We're going to lock down the internet, and this is how we're going to train students now because we can't trust them because AI is going to do everything for them. And I think that's a huge challenge for our education system is how can the universities move, which are our sort of traditional centers of learning and thinking, how are they going to pivot fast enough in a world where literally since January, we've gone from agentic coding was a bit sloppy to anyone who can afford a software subscription is now a software engineer. It's really a fascinating change in how the world is going to work. And I think for young people entering the industry in lots of different areas, not just geoscience, this is going to be a huge both opportunity, but also a huge challenge to develop the domain expertise you're going to need to develop to be able to have a successful career, but also not to just be completely supported by AI tools. When someone asks you a question, you just put into ChatGPT and spit back the answer. So I think it's a super fascinating time for us where AI is clearly going to deliver a huge amount of value. And ironically enough, as a technical expert, I find that interesting what AI is going to unlock. But my big concern, and I hate to say this as a technical expert who normally completely tries to ignore the social sciences and human side of things, clearly the human side of things is the biggest thing we're going to have to manage. It's not the technical components.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Shaun. And if we're learning one thing from this session right now is that actually there is a huge amount of emphasis on I guess who we identify as, our humanity, and who are we as people or as individuals in this world of tech. I'm actually going to go rogue, and I'm going to invite the Oxford SEG students to come off mute, and because I think you might have something to say with regards to your reflections on what Shaun has just been saying here. Especially because, of course, you started off by talking about AI. Do you agree with what Shaun's saying, or do you reckon he's talking a load of rubbish?
I think it really, or me personally, I think it really resonated with me. Like, I do find, I don't know if it is just because of AI or maybe there's other factors involved, but there are like less opportunities available. And the expectation is maybe slightly higher now because we have these tools at our fingertips. So the standards are increasingly higher and it's getting harder to get into these things. And I also think the thing about university regulation, it is true. Like, it's hard to know where the line is sometimes on how much you're allowed to use, and sometimes it's completely banned. So I think being able to, instead of banning it, maybe we should be taught more how to integrate it into our learning. Definitely, I resonated with it a lot. Thank you, Shaun.
I wanted to say that I think the user of the AI is something which is actually underestimated. And people may disagree with me on this, but I don't think it's as simple as people can just use AI and see if it comes up with a good result or not. you really have to, it's your attitude to the problem you're solving and your past knowledge of the area you're looking at. Like I did an internship once, and I remember that I had to go through a lot of similar monotonous data, but I wasn't as familiar with it. So I had to do kind of the manual side of it first, getting really familiar with what this data is, and then processing it and finding out how to do it correctly. And if I use like an AI to help me find out how to process it correctly, that's different from just putting the whole thing into AI and being like, what is this? Give me the answer, right? So I think the user maybe is a bit underestimated in these discussions.
Yeah,
Shaun, I
look,
see you nodding there.
the user is a huge part of it. And as I say, the chatbot would or the AI code would go off and do stupid things. I'm like, why are you doing this? That's not how we do this. Can you do it that way, please? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Of course, it's always very sycophantic about how much of a genius I am. But it's it's only because I had the domain expertise to steer in the direction it needed to be steered that I could be effective. And if you weren't doing that, if you were a first year student who decided to do this, most likely you or a non-expert, you would end up not really guided in the right direction. So that's what I think the fascinating part of this is that for some people, these AI tools become superpowers that enable you to go 10 times faster, 100 times faster. I think there's also a flip side to that, which is you can also fail 10 times or 100 times faster and make a mistake much more quickly. That if you'd had the time to think about what you were doing, you may have realized along the way that sort of cognitive realization on, oh man, this isn't working, or this isn't a great idea that I'm about to do here. So it's sort of, with great power becomes great responsibility. And I think that's really the challenge that we're going to have, is that we have developed these amazingly powerful tools, which is really no different to any other software package, that we've had. And we could all name lots of different software packages that, people tell you, well, yeah, it'll do whatever you want it to do, but that doesn't mean it's going to give you the right answer. You've got to know what you're doing with it, which I don't think is any different to any other software package we've had in the past.
So just to that, Sean. So I know that you will have been having these conversations at the University of British Columbia. I know that the same conversations are being had at Oxford, and then at Imperial College London, where I do a bit of work as well. It's around, well, hang on a second, if we can help make sure that students who are graduating from our institutions can walk into the workplace as experts in being able to manipulate the latest developments in AI, machine learning, etc., then that is a massive skill to walk into a workplace with that might not already exist there. But the ability to then collaborate with people who are the domain experts, that world of work suddenly changes because you actually walk into the workplace with this amazing skill that people are then reliant on you for. Are you having those conversations, Shaun?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's in some ways it's going to democratize what we can do, and we've sort of gone from, we've had this thing and probably been telling students for 15 years, you better learn how to code because that's going to be a big part of your future. And as someone who never had time, I was just like, oh, I'm going to get so be a dinosaur at some point. And now I'm thumbing my nose at everyone saying, ha, I don't have to learn how to code anymore. I can code too. Which is really, it's a fascinating change where these tools are going to enable people to collaborate. And it's not only data science, it's things like language. I reflect on universities having, I come obviously from Canada. You have to come in either with English standards that you have to pass. And I sit there and look at that and go, are we going to need those same standards anymore because we're going to have such good translation skills, real-time translation skills, that we should be able to bring people in who don't necessarily have to hit a 7.0 and an IELTS score. So we can really democratize huge parts of our education and workforce system. And we're absolutely having discussions around what is this going to look like. And I said to people, you can set students an assignment and try to ban AI, or you could tell them, look, 10% of your grade is going to come from the final assignment outcome. 90% of it is going to come from your chatbot transcript, where I look at what you have put into the tool, how have you interacted with it, what questions did you ask, what material did you find, which actually demonstrates that you understand the subject matter, not that you wrote a beautifully polished assignment that came from one or two AI prompts. So I think it's a really interesting question of How are we going to do this? I think it's a little bit like people being concerned about math skills when calculators came in, that no one could do math anymore in their heads. And I think, there's a degree of truth in that. But how much does it matter that people can't multiply on the fly? It's annoying at the supermarket if you buy something too expensive because you couldn't divide by 100 grams properly. But those tools democratized a huge amount of stuff. And I think that's a big thing with the AI, is that, yes, there's lots of concern, but it's clearly something in front of us. And as educators, as young people coming into the profession, you're going to have to learn how to interact with them. And I think it's beholden on the academic community to basically work this out. And I think the problem is the space is moving so fast. As I said, 3 years ago, some of my colleagues looked at it and said, well, it got all of that garbage completely, got all that stuff completely wrong. This is not a threat. To all of a sudden, it could be writing, and is writing, complete scientific papers for us, which was then swamping the peer-reviewed publication system as another sort of artifact of this. And we haven't dealt with it as a we just aren't able to pivot quickly enough. And we're seeing, for example, funding agencies are explicitly saying you cannot review this funding proposal with AI, which in some ways I think is a good thing. I wouldn't want to just be judged by a computer. You could also make the flip argument that if you put all the proposals in and had the same AI system review them all, you would end up with a more consistent set of reviews. Is this research being proposed by anyone else, etc. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating world. And I think back to your theme on a world of constant change, this is an area that's changing almost week by week. And I think that makes it incredibly challenging for everyone to stay on top of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, Shaun. Now we've got a number of questions that are coming in on the chat, but given that we're now looking at everyone who's been here and spoken today, I mean, firstly, a massive thanks, Shaun, for coming and provoking those thoughts with us. So round of applause for Shaun,
Thank you.
everyone.